our public dollars should be going to things that are for the betterment of our people or our state. The case that can be made to say that gender affirming care is for the betterment of these people. To that I would say, when your worldview is so twisted that you can't see right from wrong, then no amount of money or surgeries is going to help that anyway. It's a worldview issue. What are your core values? What you actually believe is true? It's a delusion and a worldview issue. And that's the problem.
Good morning, Idaho. Welcome to the local Yocal Idaho podcast, where we talk about what is going on in the wonderful state of Idaho. For those tuning in for the first time, we like to have a little banter before we get into the stories. So, I understand if you're short on time, so we provided the timestamps in the description so you can jump straight into the stories that you are interested in. Thank you for joining us for the banter. Just a little bit of some time to chat with you all. Hopefully you had a wonderful 4th of July. I know I am recording it in the future, so my 4th of July should be great. I'm speaking forward. That I'm not God, so I can't read the future, but in theory, it should be an amazing 4th of July, and hopefully the viewer had a wonderful one as well, celebrating and enjoying blowing stuff up, which is it's a wonderful American pastime. With that said, hopefully it is cooler. It seems like the last 2 weeks, 2 years? Yeah, I'm all discombobulated. It's hot, it's warm here. I'm hoping it's cool on the 4th of July. We'll put it that way. Last year I can remember wearing a coat, so hopefully it's cooler for you guys on that day as well. That said, also, we're going to have John co-hosting with me again today.
Yeah, I'm excited to be celebrating, let's see, what are people calling it? July, which is American Awareness Month. American Pride Month. I don't know. But super glad to be here. I know. So we bought some rabbits. Oh man, any number of months ago. We bred some of them, and on the 4th, we're planning on, and I guess in the future we will have already processed them, and so we'll have some yummy rabbit meat in the freezer or the fridge or somewhere, and potentially in our bellies.
Are you going to smoke it, or do you like to do it on the grill?
I've never done rabbits before. I'm excited. I know there are any number of people that we both know who they raise and make all kinds of stuff with rabbits. So we'll probably reach out to some of them, or we'll talk to them at the 4th of July thing that we're going to be at and figure out what on earth we're doing with these rabbits. If nothing else, we'll grind up the meat and treat it just like any other ground meat.
Right. At least, I know the biggest thing for me anytime I have meat is please just marinate it. Please. I want the flavor to go all through it. Sometimes where there's certain meats I'll have, and I love meat, for the record, not a vegetarian, if you could figure that out. It's one thing if you put the seasoning on the outside, but then if I get past the skin, then it's gone. Marinate it. Get it in there.
Well, that depends on the meat that you're eating. Like if you're eating a good steak, honestly, you don't really need to do much. You might just put some salt and pepper on there because the meat itself will taste good all by itself. Maybe. If you're going to do some pork, I could see marinating it. That's really good. Or chicken breasts. The best chicken breast recipe I've ever done is just Italian dressing. Buy your cheap Italian dressing from the grocery store and just have your chicken marinated in that for, 4, 5, 6 days.
I mean, a little bit of lemon and a little bit of Worcestershire sauce or something. I'm guessing that's what my mother has done, but she's marinated a couple steaks, and the non-marinated, the marinated. I gotta admit, a little bit of a marinade there. Add a little bit of flavor in there. Granted, I don't know, maybe the steak isn't as flavorful or free range, so it might have more flavor if it was like that.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I like the taste of beef all by itself. Yeah, seriously, with a steak, just a little bit of salt, a little bit of pepper. Now, if you're going to do a flat iron steak or a flank steak or something like that, yeah, marinate the crap out of that. And then it's fantastic. If you're doing, a New York strip or
I don't think I've ever had that. At some point I need to.
That. Yeah. Just eat it. We did. So we bought, I think it was a quarter cow, and we got some filet mignon with it. And that, I can understand why it's so expensive and why people love it, because it oh man, just melt in the mouth. Wonderful. So good.
The one thing I've had that, I have no doubt it's not the exact same, and it needs to be cooked right. I've had it bad, and it might weird out the viewers, so prepare. Kids might go, ew, but having really good cooked tongue reminds me of steak, but without the gristle, if it's done right. I mean, if you overcook it, then it's, it can taste like what you think it might taste like. But if it's cooked correctly, it really does taste like steak, but without any gristle.
Well, so what we've done in the past, and I'm in agreement, is tacos, let's see, what is it? De la luenga. Tacos de la luenga. You boil your tongue and then dice it and fry it and then just put it in tacos. And it's fantastic. Yeah, it tastes
amazing.
Wonderful. The thing about the tongue is it has an odd texture. It's almost like eating, I don't want to say rubber, but I don't know, like really hard Jell-O, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's an odd texture. So, but if you can get past that, or if you can put it in something where texture doesn't really matter, like in a taco or a burrito or a taco salad or something like that. Oh, it's so good.
It's great. Some people get weirded out by it, but I'm like, it tastes great.
So the other one that my wife has done is we've started buying hearts. And so we'll boil that in like rosemary and thyme and a little bit of salt. And we'll just boil it for ever.
Rosemary,
4 or 5
really good.
hours boiling. And it's fantastic. It is so good.
Well, in any case, depending on what you guys are having for 4th of July, you might be sitting and kicking yourself now after what we've talked about. You're like, I should have done that for the 4th of July, honey. Next year, remind me to do tongue. I forgot that on the list for 4th of July dish.
De la luenga. There you go.
Yeah, you can message us on Twitter or whatever what you had for your 4th of July. It seems like every holiday someone has their staples. I know for 4th of July for me, you've got to have some corn on the cob for me. I love that, or a cherry pie or something with it. And I know that's more of the sweet department, but there's a lot of great things that can go with the 4th of July. But those things, for me, it's not 4th of July without them.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm pretty fluid when it comes to food for things like that. I don't know. My traditions are all over the place. For Christmas, we're doing pork. For Thanksgiving, we typically do pork these days. For Christmas, we're probably doing chicken. So 4th of July, I don't know. Hot dogs and burgers would probably be my go-to. Although at this point, it would be more like brats. And I would do my brats, and what I've started doing is I've started boiling them in beer first. And that's fantastic. Like, find the darkest, thickest, dankest beer you can find and boil them in that stuff. Fantastic brats. The beer might be terrible, but fantastic brats. My brother-in-law bought me some Hatch green chili beer. It was terrible. It tasted horrible, but man, the brats were really good. Like you got enough of that like tangy zip in there from the green chili, and yeah. If you've never done it before, boil your brats in beer. It's fantastic.
Sounds delicious. I know if I ever do want to get brats, I usually will go to downtown Nampa. There's a German deli there. And they make if I remember correctly, they make all their brats there as well.
Nice.
So you can even I think they'll have you even make custom ones if exactly what you want. So that's usually where I get them, and they do a fantastic job at those.
There you go. Yeah, I just buy the cheap ones from Winco.
That works as well. Also, speaking of 4th of July stuff, is there any go-to fireworks you usually get? Because it seems like most families I've noticed have their ones that the kids are like, are we going to have that one again this year?
This is where I'm odd for an Idahoan, is fireworks were never really that big of a deal.
Oh, really?
No. I mean, we would go to fireworks displays, and it was cool, but it wasn't a really big thing. The thing I loved doing is when we lived in Albuquerque, you'd go up into the foothills, and from the foothills you could see like the entirety of the city. You just had miles upon miles of view. And there were a couple different fireworks displays that you could see from the hills. And then you could also see all of everyone's random things popping up. So that was a lot of fun. I have fond memories of that. I don't know. It probably makes me very un-American, but I see fireworks, I'm like, oh, that's cool.
Hey, fair enough. I know for us, it's the ground cherries. Granted, those can do some interesting things. You like those. They go spinning around. Sometimes, depending on the concrete, they may come back to you. Warning there. That'll have fun family stories. Those are always fun. Another one, especially have little boys that are fun, is you get some of the like firework tanks and you aim them at each other.
Those are fun.
You try to guess which one's going to burn the other one out. That can be a little bit of a fun competition there. I know some people like the big fountains. I've been different. I get if you're in an area where ordinances, you don't get to do mortars or aerials, then cool, yeah, you get that. It's a bigger display, it's big, and you get the enjoyment of it. But at that point, I've almost been like, okay, get the ground things, do them with the kids, and then once that's done, then go drive with some friends, because you got to have someone that's out in the country or something, and then to go have some fun with the big boy toys.
Yeah, go set off the big ones. Yeah, all of the little ones are fun. Like the little spinning ones, those are fun. Sparklers are always good. Roman candles are fun. All of those things are fun. They're great.
The high-pitched whistlers, I could never quite understand that, or the smoke bombs, because, oh, cool, smoke, but yeah, smoke. We all expected that type of thing, right? There wasn't any enjoyment or surprise. And then same with the whistlers. I can't really enjoy the whistlers because it's just whistling like crazy. I'm not actually being entertained at all.
Yeah, I'm already losing enough hearing. I don't need to lose more. Yeah, well, hopefully y'all had a great time with your 4th of July, and you didn't lose any fingers or limbs.
Don't do the stupid things with fireworks.
Right? But yeah, hopefully y'all had a 4th of July, and you can help us in celebrating American Awareness Month.
Yes, American awareness, because Americans, we are not aware enough in international politics at all.
I don't think we're aware enough about our American heritage.
That is true.
Half the problem. So maybe that's what it is, American Heritage Month, where we study our forefathers, we study the founding of our nation, where we study all of the wonderful things that have come about because the United States is the greatest country on the face of the planet.
Yes. Now, some people would disagree with that, but I'm going to argue it because the dear Lord has showered us with a lot of blessings, and I hope he continues to. If you're specifically looking for cool things, maybe if you're a parent or if you're a kid out there that's interested and maybe you don't have the background, I know I've been very blessed to be with a family that's a bunch of bookworms that love to go on that and just love American history. Number one, the U.S. Constitution is an amazing read to go through. Might be a little wordy, but I recommend her. Another one is the, what are they called? The Stair Stepper books. Super, super simple book.
Yep.
If you've got a kid that can read Berenstain Bears or just some of the simplest books, they should be able to read the Stair Stepper books, and it'll be about Lewis and Clark's, Robert E. Lee, and they do a really good job on that. And I'm trying to think, there's another one. They do autobiographies. It's black. Oh, sorry. It's like a black background, and then it has the like a portrait of the person. I'm trying to remember, what are they called?
I can't remember off the top of my head.
I see.
No, there are several that are good, and I know I grew up reading all kinds of different books. But yeah, there's a lot out there. Go find some homeschool curriculum, and it'll point you to a lot of good stuff.
Oh, yeah. The internet is also wonderfully useful. Also, surprisingly, as long as you don't use ChatGPT or Gemini, you can actually get AI to find you some pretty cool stuff on American history that isn't from a negative bent. So you could also use that as well, because there's infinite amount. I've enjoyed learning it and studying it since I was a young boy, and I still have not reached the depths of all the fun interconnected bits and different parts to it. What was one I was thinking of? If I remember correctly, there's this really famous photo, and it's a photo where, not Benjamin Franklin, Lincoln is coming down a parade through a town, right? And then there's this kind of house up to the left. There's like a balcony or whatever, and someone's sitting up there. You can see the silhouette. Well, we know for irrefutable fact that person is Theodore Roosevelt, a young Theodore Roosevelt up in that room.
Huh.
So it's this crazy dynamic to see, but history is amazing how it weaves and interconnects. It's not just a bunch of dates. I swear, the worst history teachers will just teach you dates. The best history teachers will teach you the story and then the dates later.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of the founders were so young, like you talked about Teddy Roosevelt being there in Lincoln's picture. Even thinking back all the way to the founders, because a lot of the founders were so young, so many of them were a part of politics for so long because they were so young when everything started. So it's interesting when you start looking at that as well as in terms of who's doing what and when they're doing it and how long they've been a part of things. And yeah, it's history's fascinating, and American history is very interesting, if only because of the way it was set up. It was set up based on individual liberties and freedoms and God-given rights. And no other country on the face of the planet is like that.
Yes,
so, there you go.
Indeed. God bless America.
Absolutely. But bringing it back locally to Idaho politics.
Yes, bringing it back locally, we'll move into our first story here, which is very much involved in the legislative process that our founding fathers gave us. Which is, with Idaho Bill Breakdown, a series that we've been doing for the last couple weeks, going over the different bills that have been signed into law and breaking them down for you. The one we'll be looking at this week will be House Bill 668, No Tax Dollars for Transgender Surgeries. I think that's a winning slogan there. There are few things that get Idahoans madder than trying to take their guns, church, or outdoor recreation, or, as we already talked about in the banner, meat. We get frustrated if any of those things are touched. But there is one thing that is, and that's transgender surgeries on minors. I don't think I need to take a survey or need to go out and ask a bunch of people in the street to guess that the average Idahoan does not like that and does not look at it very fondly. But up till now, your tax dollars have actually been paying for it. So in this specific Idaho Bill Breakdown, we'll be looking at House Bill 668, how it changes how your tax dollars can be spent on so-called gender transition surgeries, and who you have to thank for it. So starting off first with a kind of our analysis here, and what exactly does the bill say? Well, House Bill 668 prohibits the use of public funds for gender transition surgeries for both minors and adults. It was proposed by Representative Julie Young and Representative Bruce D. Skog in the House. A few key points from the bill and what it does. First one being that no public funds can be used for surgical operations or medical interventions aimed at altering a person's appearance to affirm their perceived gender identity if it is inconsistent with their biological sex. Then number 2, these procedures are not tax deductible. 3, that the Idaho Medicaid program cannot reimburse or cover such procedures. And then state employees and facilities cannot provide or be used for these procedures. And then number 5, and the last bit here, is that it also provides that by violation by public officers or employees are considered a misuse of public money. But that's what the bill says, but you also need a little bit of past precedent to understand where exactly this sits in the context of everything. So, John, what exactly was the law before this bill was passed?
Yeah, well, before House Bill 668, Idaho didn't actually have any specific legislation prohibiting the use of public funds for gender transition procedures. While there were restrictions on gender-affirming care for minors, which was passed in 2023, adult Idahoans could potentially access such care through public funds, including Medicaid. So, since public tax dollars could and probably were being spent for people to get surgeries to try and change their gender, now it can't happen that way. Public funds can't be used for surgeries, and those caught doing so are going to be guilty of a felony punishable by imprisonment in a state prison for not less than 1 year or no more than 14 years. And they're also disqualified from holding any office of trust or profit in the state. So this is a really big deal. And it goes back to one of the things that we've talked about a couple times. We've talked about how the politics is downstream of culture, and we're seeing a cultural shift in the United States right now. So it's early in the week right now when we're talking, and I just heard on the radio that, Tractor Supply Company recently came out and said they're stopping all DEI initiatives. They're stopping all, I don't remember what the list of things were, but anything related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, they're like, yeah, we're done. We're done with that nonsense. We're just selling Tractor Supply stuff. The stuff that Tractor Supply Company sells. Because culturally, we're done with this crap. It's over. We've finished. We're done. We're moving on. And so politics, which is downstream of culture, politics is starting to do the same. And so politically, we're done. We're over it. We're moving on. We're defining what men and women are. We're saying you can't do these things to children. And I think it's a good thing. I think politically, what we're seeing in politics is a reflection of what culture is, and that's a good thing. It might not feel like it if you're living your entire life on Twitter, because Twitter is still a place where all of that, that bile boils up to the surface. But man, in terms of, at least here in Idaho, it seems like culture is moving in a really good direction.
No, I would very much agree. Specifically, I think you touched on something there, especially with the Twitter stuff, is that think of Twitter like the newspaper. If anybody you can remember, you can still find newspapers sometimes publicly. And if you read them, they will be sensational. They'll be dangerous things, doomsday sayings,
Yep.
right, and different stuff. Twitter's just the modern version of that, and quicker and from specific people. People learn that it's doom and gloom or conflict or strife, and that's what will move the needle on Twitter. I'm not saying it's always the case, but it does have that effect sometimes. That's what will bubble to the top of what the algorithm will recommend. And I don't really blame Twitter per se, just like I don't blame news publications for it. They're going to publish what moves the needle there to a bit. There are times where there's stories that I don't want to talk about on here, but I know it's something that's important. It's something that moves the needle, gets the person to click and engage. And hopefully that also means that gets you guys engaged with other stuff that is also interesting and also profitable and encourages you. But that's where I think with a lot of stuff, especially in the modern age, and you see that movement more with my generation. I think it was started with the millennials, but an idea of just get out and actually have real life experiences with people. And you'll be fascinated how, yes, there are hard bits. Yes, the economy is taking a toll on people. Not everything on Twitter is fake. I can guarantee you that. But interacting with people, there is still a lot of hope out there. And there are a lot of people that are working really hard. And if you're involved in your community, which is the whole goal of Local Yocal, you can hopefully help with that and not make the doomsayers on Twitter right. Because if everyone just lives on Twitter, then it becomes an issue. And also, I posted it on the Twitter account for our Local Yocal here, and I have their statement up here, but they are Tractor Supply for that recommendation. See here, they said 5 things. So they're no longer submitting data to the Human Rights Campaign. They're refocusing our team members' engagement groups on monitoring, networking, and supporting the business. 3, further focusing on rural American priorities, including ag education, animal welfare, veterans cause, and being a good neighbor, and stop sponsoring non-business activities like Pride Festival and voting campaigns. 4, eliminating DEI roles and retire our current DEI goals while still ensuring a respectful environment. And 5, withdrawing our carbon emission goals and focusing on land and water conservation efforts, which I think that's wonderful, and I really hope more companies follow. I know Tractor Supply got themselves in some hot water this season because they're, again, Local Yocal being an example. All of you that are watching, that are getting more involved, are a perfect example of why nationally more focus has been given to saying, I'm going to vote with my dollar, I'm going to watch what you're doing. And just because you're DMB, just because you're these places that would seem not to be that, I'm going to start looking at where you really are putting your money and funding, and you're not putting it where I really care about. And we're seeing that also here with the legislature, where the will of the people is being reflected, saying it's one thing if you want to spend your money, but the public dollar is my dollar, and I have a vote in what that does. And the people have voted no, the public dollar does not go to you doing activities that are not in concurrence with sound logic, I would argue, and that you lovingly have an issue and you need to address it. And this isn't something that should be encouraged.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's like looking at the way that your family does finances. If I'm bringing home money, or my wife is bringing home money, and we're pooling it all together, and then my child is deciding to spend all of our money on chocolate bars, we're going to put a stop to that. We're going to put a stop to spending our public money that we've pooled together for the betterment of our family. We're going to stop the spending of that on something that's going to ultimately harm us.
Right.
So, yeah, I think it's great. I think it makes sense to me. Our public dollars should be going to things that are for the betterment of our people or our state. Now, I can see the case that can be made against that, to say that gender-affirming care is for the betterment of these people. And to that, I would say, when your worldview is so twisted that you can't see right from wrong, then no amount of money or surgeries is going to help that anyway. And I think that plays out in the statistics. It's a delusion and a worldview issue, and that's the problem. It's not the fact that your body isn't the way you want it to be. My body's not the way I want it to be. Never has been. I have a goofy body. Also, I'm very overweight. I look in the mirror and I go, man, I'm overweight. I would love to not be that. And then I go about my life. And if I want to change that, heck, I'll change it. And if I don't, then heck, I won't. And I'll just be fat the rest of my life. And it is what it is. But yeah, it's my fault. I eat too much food. It's not that hard.
Point and case.
Yeah, and scene. Like, that's it. We're done. So, yeah, I think a lot of this comes down to it's a worldview issue. It's a what are your core values issue. What do you actually believe is true issue? And if we can solve those things, if we can get people on the right page in terms of what is true, what is right, what is a good worldview, frankly, I don't see gender dysphoria being a major issue. Now, maybe it still will be for some individuals, and that's a thing, and we can figure that out, but that's not what's going on right now. So
No,
anyway.
not at all. I mean, I think Jordan Peterson has shown some really good studies that in certain areas you can have a psychological pandemic. If you want to go research that, I'm not going to go deeply into the numbers, but basically to the sum of idea of if a certain psychological deformity or issue becomes trendy, it can literally spread and people can have the symptoms down to the very diagnostic manual, but it's not actually it because people are working themselves on their mind. The mind is a very powerful thing. You can see what you can do with modern computers with large language models, right? Imagine what a brain like yourselves could do to itself if you wield it wrongly. And also pivoting on that, I think this legislation is a perfect example of where some legislatures say, we need to do it now. If I don't have the perfect bill, I'm not going to pass it. And in some areas, like maybe spending, that's fair. There's a point to put your foot down and be like, enough is enough. There's been enough marginal compromise, no more. I understand and I respect that. But this bill specifically, and we alluded to it, in 2023, there was a bill passed that said you couldn't fund gender-affirming care nor do it on minors. And that passed, and that was great. And then this bill came along that then inched it a little bit forward. And this should be an encouraging thing for conservative legislators or for people in general. When I say this, the left already knows what they're doing. They do it all the time. The right just needs to learn this lesson, is that be persistent. It does pay off, and this would not be another perfect example of it. With this, just saying one step, another step here, another step there, it all adds up. And I guess bringing that all back to you, because we've talked about the overarching things, but what does it mean? Well, in general, Idaho is going to hopefully save money that it wouldn't be spending otherwise on weird things. Idaho is continuing, like we said, they passed a bill this last session on one of our previous Idaho bill breakdowns that talked about how there are only two genders. If there's only two genders, why would you let public funds then go to fund a process that tries to make more than two genders and weird chimeras, right? As we've said, it's the Idaho taxpayer speaking. And then also this has some teeth to it. I had to go look it up in the exact bill. If you go look at it, it doesn't exactly say the punishment type. It just cites Idaho code. If you want, reach out to me and I can find the Idaho code. I didn't put in my notes per se here, but it has the punishment. You can go look up the Idaho code on Google, or you can plug it into any AI search engine, and it should be able to pull it up there for you of what those punishments are. So there's also some teeth tied to it. If certain government agencies try to weasel out of it, it's not just, hey, this is a suggestion. It does have some teeth here. And I think it's a really exciting development. It's a simple build, but it should have some pretty wide-reaching applications. Which, if you like that story about your tax dollars not going to gender-affirming surgeries, please make sure to subscribe and follow us on YouTube, Rumble, or Twitter to stay up to date on all things Idaho. For even more content and to support our work, check out our locals page. If you found our content valuable, please like and share it with friends and family. Your support helps us spread the word about our beautiful state and to keep Idahoans informed and engaged. That being said, thank you for being part of the local Yocal Idaho community. Now, on to the next segment. Keeping with the theme of hot button topics, one of those is the fight over school choice in Idaho. Looking at what on earth is it? In recent years, education has become a hot topic in Idaho and America as a whole. And Idaho, we've seen that with the library bill and bathroom bills that have moved through in their respective years of 2023 and 2022. To the national level with Ron DeSantis leading the charge there in Florida. At the center of this has been a term called school choice. Some may say it might be the end of education in America, if you want to be a bit more of a doomsayer on Twitter, and others on the right say it is letting the free market into education. In this segment, we'll be seeing what school choice is, how it might actually be the salvation for Idaho's education issues. First off, the most simple question when we're looking at school choice is probably, what is school choice? Well, school choice simply refers to various education options available to parents and students beyond the traditional public school education system. Some states make this very hard to do and force parents to only be on the public school education system, or basically in effect, while other states allow for more free movement between different forms of education. The current system we have here in Idaho is a limited school choice system. It's not a full-blown one, nor is it no school choice at all. It allows you to choose from several options. You have charter schools, private schools, and homeschools. Now, while there are those options beyond the public school, this is where this optional part of the school choice happens. Idaho doesn't have a comprehensive school choice system that includes school choice programs that allow for education savings accounts or vouchers, where part of the tax dollars are being allowed for the public to access for the sake of education. You are more welcome in Idaho to go out of the education system and to homeschool or whatever, but you're not going to get any of your tax dollars back. Most school choice in Idaho occurs within the educational system through the open enrollment and charter schools. So people are moving, but it's usually still within the bureaucracy of the public school system. This number is backed up by about 77% of Idaho students are still attending their assigned neighborhood public schools. So most people still are staying in that system or don't feel comfortable or don't either have the money to get out of it. This is also supported if we look at current trends. As many of you can remember, and we've reported on the midweek report, several schools have closed, one in Nampa in particular, and others are facing low attendance numbers, even those in Boise's. Some, like myself, would have guessed this has more to do with people being fed up with the public school. Being a homeschooler, I think people are finally coming to their senses. But it's a little different than that. In a recent article from the Idaho Freedom Foundation, it notes from 2019 to 2023, Idaho public schools lost over 10,000 students. That's a 3.5% decline. This trend is projected to continue with an estimated for example, in Boise, the second largest school district in the state, 6.4% of students are kindergartners, but while about 9.1% are 10th graders, which kind of indicates that there's a smaller group of students moving through the education system. This is also supported by the birth numbers in 2022. In 2020, around only 21,500 babies were born statewide, and nearly 21,000 in 2022, which is indicating a bit of a decline in the birth rate in Idaho, which also affects the education system if most people are going through the public schools, we saw with that 77% number. Now, with that said, we've gotten that overview, but what are the proposed changes? What type of school choice things are happening? John, do you want to dig into that for us?
Yeah, so to address that declining student population in public schools, it's argued that schooling funds need to be more flexible. And so this is where you enter into the idea of school choice. Now, there are two main camps that are battling things out. First, you have the Education Savings Account people, or ESAs. So ESAs are state-funded accounts that parents can use to pay for various educational expenses, including private school tuition, online learning, tutoring, and homeschooling materials. These funds get deposited directly into the accounts, and parents can then choose how to spend the money to best meet their child's needs. So that's one option. The other option would be tax credit scholarships. Now, these allow individuals and businesses to receive tax credits for donations to nonprofit scholarship organizations. These organizations then provide scholarships for students to attend private schools or other educational programs. So some pros and cons here. For the tax credit scholarship, some pros are that it encourages private donations to support school choice without directly using public education funds. They can provide scholarships to low-income or disadvantaged students who may not otherwise be able to afford private schools. And then also they offer an alternative to traditional public schools for families who are seeking different educational environments or opportunities. Some different educational opportunities. On the con side of things, though, they result in less tax revenue for the state, which could indirectly impact public school funding, I guess. And then some argue that it's a roundabout way of supporting private schools with public dollars. Some people also have concerns about whether scholarship organizations will be transparent and equitable in awarding funds. There comes equity again. Making sure we've got diversity, equity, and inclusion would be even better. And then some people are concerned that they may not actually provide as much flexibility as ESAs, since funds are limited to scholarships rather than a variety of expenses. So that's the tax credit scholarships. And then you can talk about ESAs. Now, people who are for these, they say that they'll provide maximum flexibility for parents to customize their child's education, that you can spend money on whatever you want so long as it's towards your child's education. There's that. They allow the funds to be used for a wide range of educational services beyond just private school tuition. And then it empowers low and middle income families to access education options that may otherwise be unaffordable. And you can see that one. Some people are saying that's a pro for both systems. So I guess that's a goal here, is to make sure that low income people can actually afford education for their children. And that is actually something that's in our state constitution, is that we provide public schooling for children. We have to do that. It's in our constitution. Anyway, some cons for the ESAs is that it's going to divert public funds away from traditional public schools, potentially weakening the public education system. We are constitutionally required to provide that. So I can see that. Other people say that it raises concerns about accountability for how taxpayer dollars are spent on private educational services, because we know that our government spends money. Anyway, and then some critics also argue that it could lead to a greater segregation or inequality if only certain families can take advantage of these ESAs. So some pros and cons on both sides. There's also the strings attached comment that if you're accepting any money from the government, then there are strings attached. And I know there's a large swath of homeschoolers in Idaho that are just saying, no, there will be no funds for homeschooling. Period. End of story. None of that. Because we want no strings. Because we worked really hard to be completely free and we're not getting sucked back in. So there's that too.
Right, which is fair. With all of this, I think the simplest thing, independent of which system you take, is that school choice is letting people decide how their children are educated. Now, there's two different ways to achieve that. You have the tax credit, you have the ESA option. I think looking at this and from the research I did on the story, some form of school choice, if you're listening, I try to be generally nice, but if you're a liberal, unless you're a liberal, you should be able to say that a school choice is something that we do need, that the free market, I think, especially within education or medical, needs to be involved more to balance out so that people can decide that, because the government really sucks at deciding what needs funds and what doesn't needs funds. So let's let the people do it, because they're a little better at that, especially God working through them, hopefully, in the church. And then not only that, but also we see with the declining population and other parts of that and funding and things that there needs to be more flexibility. You can't keep using such a rigid system. You need something that can flex and bend and adapt to such a dramatic different shift, or it's just going to all snap and break together, which to the person who loves the public school system and really believes it still should be around, then you should be for school choice, because if it's all make or break on this public school system and the public school system breaks, well, then no one gets education. But with school choice, that load can be distributed a lot more. It doesn't have to be in this tightly regulated and controlled system. No matter the type of school in that choice. But then we have the two options, and then discussion becomes which one. The first one, obviously, that me and John are more familiar with is the homeschool side of it. I know some homeschoolers are like, get that thing away from me. We don't want it. We like homeschooling because it's not regulated and all these things. And to that, I'm like, I hear you. I really do. And that is fair. But on the one hand, respect for the homeschooler. I know some homeschoolers are only interested in Idaho politics just for the homeschooling part, which is totally fair. But I would appeal to you, anytime if we see a political group that sticks their head in the sand and says they're not willing to come to the negotiating table to either find a solution for the other party or just to find a solution anyways, or a middle ground or something, is usually the group that gets steamrolled eventually, because everyone sees them as being a prude and just being stuck up in what they're doing. So just homeschoolers digging our heels in and saying no to this is not going to end well, because eventually it'll become where they're like, well, the homeschoolers refuse to take a position, so we're actually going to go the other direction and say it needs to be hogging for the public schools, which is the exact opposite of what homeschoolers should want. We should want more people coming into it. Now, I know you people don't want the strings, but my appeal to you would be, this is an optional program. You don't have to take those funds. It's not that the government says you have to. Obviously, there may be down the line some strings. Right now, obviously, there's not, but welcome to government probably putting some strings. Oh, I'm going to hit the mic twice tonight. Some strings on it. But it is an option for, and also it's not just for you, Mr. and Mrs. Homeschooler, as much as I know we feel so important at times. It's also for those who want to spend it on private school. They want to spend it on other stuff. It's not just for you, the homeschooler. I would much rather that the government obviously wouldn't take that money for education, but I understand why, because I think in a certain degree it is good to take our collective wealth and hopefully send that towards those that are lower to help them. I believe that would be more the church than the state for education. But because of that thing in the Idaho Constitution, can't quite do that.
Yeah, I'm torn on that because I know that education is very important. I would say it's critical. And like you said, I am biased. I do think that homeschooling is the best way of educating children. But having said that, it's not the best way for everyone. It's not the best way for every situation. It's not the best way for every family, and it's not the best way for every kid. I get that. And so there have to be other options. And so when we talk about the either option, the tax credits or the education savings accounts, I see those as being options to get kids out of the public schools, really, and to provide that free market system to our education. And frankly, you said it already, I think that is one of the biggest problems with our education system right now is that it's not a free market. Like you have one venue that is completely propped up by outside forces. Venue that's completely propped up, then it doesn't matter how much you're innovating, it doesn't matter how much you're succeeding, that one that's propped up, well, it's going to succeed or it's going to receive all of the money and all of the clients because, well, it's just the biggest, it's the easiest, it's what's there.
Right.
The other side of that is that, dude, I've walked into old schools. I did some site investigations and some site assessments at some old schools that have been in operation since the 50s. And it breaks my heart to see that they're thinking of closing facilities because, well, they just don't have kids there. It makes me sad because so many of these teachers have poured so much of their hearts into these students for so long. Like these facilities, they bleed care for kids. And so I'm sad to see old facilities that have so much history and they've had so many kids pass through their doors to see them close. Like that sucks. I'm with you there. But also sometimes the way that we're doing things isn't the best way. And who knows, maybe those old facilities, maybe they can be repurposed for something else. Maybe they could be taken over by a charter school. I don't know. Like,
right.
Just because that's the thing that always was there, that doesn't mean that it's actually good now. Even if it was good 30 years ago, that doesn't mean it's good now. So,
right.
Anyway.
I teased at it earlier, but the part is, yes, Idaho's Constitution says that we have to maintain public education. That doesn't mean we have to encourage it. So the cool loophole is technically the Idaho legislature could work towards basically gutting where we have a public school system and maybe there's only like 50 people in the entire state in it, but it's maintained, air quotations. It would still fulfill that constitutional requirement. And then everyone else just goes and takes their money and goes elsewhere. That would still fulfill that tenet, but also, if you're being literal, now, obviously the Idaho Supreme Court could try to do that, but as the interpretation currently stands, technically the Idaho legislature could try to set the educational system where it encourages, the Idaho Constitution does not say we have to encourage people to do the public education system. We just have to maintain one.
Right.
So in theory, the Idaho legislature could sit there and encourage everyone to go elsewhere with their money with ESA accounts or tax credit scholarships, right? And that you would almost get like 100% of it back, but there'd just be a small amount that would be taken out of it maybe for that small percentage of the population that's still going to those rare public schools. But it wouldn't then violate that constitutional requirement in Idaho's Constitution.
Yeah, it's an interesting argument. I understand where a lot of people are coming from, a lot of sides of this. And I don't know if ESAs or the tax credit scholarships, I don't know if either of those is the right one. But again, we need some sort of reform for our public schools here in Idaho because, gosh, one, people are leaving the public school system. And so apparently we're doing something wrong. So we should try to fix it.
I mean, there's the
Should try
leaving
something.
part. The part that was interesting, though, and if you read the Idaho Freedom Foundation put out a nice article on it, they were arguing more from the sense that, yes, homeschooling is a thing in Idaho, but comparatively, there's like 77% of the state that still goes to public school. The argument that was being made there, which was one I hadn't heard genuinely, that was being made was that this is a combination of, we had a huge population, Idaho did, in the, I guess, the 2000 teens, I don't know what you want to call those years, like 2012, 2016, that period, there was a lot of children, but going into the 2020s, there haven't been nearly as much children, and we're seeing that work its way through the public education system, and it's a drastic drop. And so if you're wondering, well, where is the attendance numbers going down? Well, yes, we have more people come into the state, but that doesn't mean all those people are having children. Not always. And the rate that they're having children is less. So you're even in the second largest school district in the state, you're seeing declines in their enrollment, and you're seeing it move through as that cohort of a lot of children are finally graduating. There is that aspect. And I definitely think there's also the aspect that there are a lot of people leaving it. Those numbers I wasn't quite able to find. That's probably playing a part on it. But the public school district it's getting battered from all sides. We're seeing a lot of ways of where the public school district, even in the face of declining enrollment, says it needs new buildings and new personnel, which, all generosity given, I have no doubt there are great educators there, but that makes no sense. If you have a company where you're saying, we're getting less orders for this model of car, we need to ramp up that production line. What on earth are you doing? That makes no sense.
I will argue for the facilities side of things. There are a lot of facilities in our state that are just crap. I work in the design and construction industry, and I've walked through schools looking at systems above ceilings and behind walls, and a lot of the schools in our state are being held together with shoestrings, and it's not good. So again, like we said, constitutionally, we're required to have a public school system. Well, the question is, are the buildings that we're using even safe? It's questionable. So I will push back on the fact that we should spend money on these buildings that we have for our children, because our children, we should treat them well and they should be safe. And buildings require maintenance. They require upkeep. They require upgrades over time. So I'll push back on that. Like, facilities wise, you got to spend money on facilities. It's like owning a home. If you own a home but never put any money into it, then it's going to fall down.
A lot of that falls on the levy and bonds, which there were a couple that did pass. There was a lot that failed. But that independent of education, that happened a lot across the state. The part would be interesting to look into, I didn't have it ready for this, is Idaho, the two biggest things, if you go and look at Idaho's budget, they're in the billion. Shocker. We do spend $1 billion. Look, we're like the federal government. The first one is on Medicaid. It's our biggest thing that Idaho spends on. Granted, a lot of that's subsidized at the federal level. The second thing is education. We're spending I want to say it's $2 billion. Don't quote me on that. That's a rough jump out of my hat, but billion on education.
It's a massive number.
It was curious to see how that's affecting the construction or why it's not getting there.
I don't know. Again, it goes back to what you were saying earlier. When you have a failing system, our schools aren't failing because the facilities are bad. Our schools are failing because the people running the system are bad. And so, yes, we should spend money on upgrading our facilities. We should also make sure we're not spending money on bad educators or bad systems, or figure out what's not working and get rid of that.
Which maybe then again, it would be something that would be interesting. I think you could do this. And if someone's listening out there for bond or levy things, if there's a way to word those where it says that the funding that's being allocated can only be used for construction purposes.
Yeah.
That might be something, if you're a person out there who's wanting to get a bond and levy passed, you may be able to get it passed that way. Because if a lot of those are being written in such a way where it's a blank check to the library administrative state, if you want to call it, that might not play very well for you right now in the public image. So that might be something you may need to look at depending on the area and municipality that you're in there. And then getting into the two different options, I know me and John could probably go back and forth, and I know there's probably great arguments given for both, but My 2 cents on it is simply that we need one of them, one or some form of school choice, some way that it goes outside of the public school administrative apparatus there. My 2 cents personally would be the ESA savings accounts, mainly because of the fact that it gives the most amount of freedom for the consumer to decide where to put their funds, and thus the free market can do the most magic there in a sense. I know there's the cons that are given, that it diverts money away from public schools. My vote is competition. If a system is failing and it diverts money away from it, hopefully that will encourage that system to get more frugal and better and more efficient at the money it does have, rather than thinking it's just going to get a big check. So for me, I actually see that more as a plus, not as a con to anyone.
Yeah.
The other one is it raises concerns about accountability about taxpayer dollars. My answer is, why do you care? If I have a child and I'm the adult, you shouldn't be worried about how I'm educating. It's my money. Let me spend it how I want to educate my child. That to me doesn't seem like a very legitimate reason. Obviously, if the kid can't pass standardized tests for graduation, then all right, maybe I'd grant that, but let me use that money for education.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. There's a question about causing harm to children, and by not educating them properly, are you causing them harm? And so there's an argument there, and I'll hear that and understand that is an argument. So yeah, it's a big, deep subject. But
for those of you that have older family members, you might know about this, but I can't remember the term off the top of my head, but there are such things as where a family will put money in a form of an account that the older person, if maybe they're struggling with how they're spending things or stuff, they can only pull it out for medical expenses. Only pull it out for maybe college or productive things, right? So maybe they're not abusive, or maybe it's a younger child or something.
Trust funds for kids.
Yeah. If we can do that in the private sector, I don't see, and I know the homeschooler crowd, look, it's there, you're already talking about regulating it, but if that's the one concern to get this legislation across the line, if it's just, hey, you have to validate that it's going to educational things, curriculum, tutors, private schools, something like that.
Yeah.
I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing, to just have that 1 ounce of accountability that's not a 100% blank check.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the big takeaway is that it's a big, complicated topic, and that's why not much has happened yet. It's because there's a lot of people that care a lot about a lot of children, and then there's also a lot of people that make a lot of money off of the public school system who really want it to stay as it is.
Right. And
so
an interesting takeaway, correlation isn't causation, but I think it's 4. I can't remember off the top of my head. I know Julie Yamamoto was one of them, but 4 of the biggest people that were standing against school choice this last primary all lost re-election. All of them. Some of the biggest proponents in that camp. So it will be, you could say it might be because of that. Idaho struggle. I wish more people could do surveys in Idaho, because it's really hard sometimes to know what people think. But I wouldn't be shocked if, for a lot of the reasons some of those people lost those races, wasn't the topic of education, because I do know surveys that have been done across the state. One of the top 3 or 5 issues that Idahoans have said they're interested in the Idaho legislature, one of those was education. I'm saying that, but it will be interesting to see how the legislature will come at school choice this last session. There were similar legislation about ESAs and school choice. Some of them barely even made it to the floor in the representative wings of the Idaho legislature, and they didn't even pass. Overall, complex topic. Hopefully we've given you a good overview. We've also given resources. There was 3 that I mainly used for it. There's KTVB7's article. The Idaho Freedom Foundation's one has a lot of great numbers cited there very well by a professor. And then also there's the Gem State Chronicle that did a really good job there as well and cites it, and also goes a little bit more into the legislative side of it. So if you want to see that and those bills I was referring to that were struggling in those specific races. But definitely overall something that needs fixed, and we'll have to see as it keeps progressing here. Which, that brings us to the end of the Sunday show. I sure hope you found it enjoyable and informative. If we missed anything important or got something wrong, please reach out to us via email at lyimedia@protonmail.com or on Twitter at @LocalYocalIdaho. We appreciate your support and feedback as we work to bring you the most interesting and important stories across the state. That's all for now. I wish you a fantastic rest of your week, and Godspeed.